those are going to sorry. On those are going today we are going to read a story, but first up we are going to be doing daily devotions with Daniel, and then we are going to be reading the Bible, and then we are going to be doing snaps with Daddy, and then we are going to be reading Fellowship of the Ring. I hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell, and not miss the video. I think that the Two Towers is going to be much easier to remember because it's only 3 words.
It's not coming up in my notifications.
Here's my brother.
It's not coming up in my notifications.
Hello.
Are you sure we're live?
Yeah, it says we're live. So yesterday we did Toy Soldiers. That was June the 1st, and June 2nd is Got Milk. Come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean. 2 Corinthians 6:17. Though previous generations enjoyed milk directly from the cow, today's health officials warn that the raw milk carries increased risk of contamination. But supporters of the raw milk say pasteurization destroys nutrients.
Everybody's looking at your head, your hair.
Okay. Although some of us grew up on farms, most of us now get our milk from stores where we have enough choices to make Betsy the cow's head spin. Standardized, whole, reduced fat, low fat, skim, non-fat, buttermilk, organic, and acidophilus. I think. Acidophilus. Oh my gosh. Etc. Doesn't say etc., but whatever.
No, it is, etc.
Grabbing that gallon of milk forces us to make a choice about separation. Whether we realize it or not, after it stands a while, fresh milk has a tendency to separate into a high-fat cream layer on top and a thinner layer below. When we grab our particular jug of choice, we're determined our preferred degree of separation. The processing of milk reflects a wider truth at the last day. God will separate the cream from the skim and wheat from the chaff. Chaff. And the sheep from the goats. Until then, we should lead lives and separation. Holy and pleasing to Him, to come out from among them and be separate. Perhaps there's something we need to skim off the top of our lives today. Measure your growth in grace by your sensitivities to sin. Oswald Chambers.
Hi! How is everyone? The one person that's here, that's probably in the room.
I have a headache.
So,
I'm really tired.
it is Global Running Day, and I just got this today, which is ironic, but I completed the Giza Challenge, and that was 75 kilometers, or about 46 miles of running. So I thought that I would wear it. There's Anubis on the back. There's a scarab. I'm sure Mom wants me to show that it opens, and there's a little thing that comes out, actually.
It's a beetle.
It looks like that.
You're a beetle.
You can be quiet. And it says Conqueror. That's the name of the company, I think. That's their logo. That's what their app looks like on my phone. It says Giza. The ribbon is really nice. So, and
How many miles did you run to get that?
I already said that. 75 kilometers. Is it 75? Yeah, 75 kilometers or 46 miles. So, All right. I had a good time, and now I am working on the Hadrian's Wall Challenge, which is 90 miles. And I'm already doing a great job working on that one. About 10% through it. All right, so now we are on 1 Samuel chapter 23. This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. And let me begin. Now they told David, "Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors." I did read 22, right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I read that. Are robbing the threshing floors. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack those Philistines?" And the Lord said to David, "Go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah, however you say that." But David's men said to him, "Behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines?" Then David inquired of the Lord again, and the Lord answered him, "Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand." And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and brought away their livestock and struck them with a great blow. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. When Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, had fled to David to Keilah, he had come down with an ephod in his hand. Now it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, and Saul said, "God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars." And Saul summoned all the people to war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. David knew that Saul was plotting harm against him, and he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod here." Then David said, "O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, the God of Israel, please tell your servant." And the Lord said, "He will come down." Then David said, "Will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul?" And the Lord said, "They will surrender you." Then David and his men, who were about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the expedition, and David remained in the strongholds in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not give him into his hand. David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life. David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh, and Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David at Horesh, and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, "Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Saul my father also knows this." And the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. David remained at David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. Then the Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah, saying, "Is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horesh, on the hill of Hakilah, which is south of Jeshimon? Now come down, O king, according to all your heart's desire to come down, and our part shall be to surrender him into the king's hand." And Saul said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, for you have had compassion on me. Go make yet more sure. Know and see the place where his foot is, and who has seen him there. For it is told me that he is very cunning. See therefore and take note of all the lurking places where he hides, and come back to me with sure information. Then I will go with you, and if he is in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah." And they arose and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the Arabah, to the south of Jeshimon, and Saul and his men went to seek him, and David was told, so he went down to the rock and lived in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard that, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. And David was hurrying to get away from Saul, as Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture them. A messenger came to Saul, saying, "Hurry and come, for the Philistines have made a raid against the land." So Saul returned from pursuing after David, and went against the Philistines. Therefore that place was called the Rock of Escape. And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-gedi. And that is the end of chapter 23. And chapter 24 is another one of those chapters that's very well known. And we'll read that one tomorrow. So, one thing that I noticed when I know nobody likes me rambling. One thing that I noticed in this passage here is that I almost stopped actually because it was because I didn't think that I'd remember, and I don't. So David saved the city of Keilah from the Philistines, right, in the beginning of the chapter, and then halfway through the chapter the people of Keilah were ready to give David up. So I think that says something about human nature. And I don't want to hypothesize too much, but yeah, I haven't thought about it theologically like right now, but it's something to think about. All right, so now metal. Okay. So we are in. I've got bugs that are trying to attach to the light now. That's not good. All right, so now we are in. Hi, Rebecca. I don't know if she's still there or not. Oh, my book's upside down. So we were in the middle of the chapter. They were going down the river. They went past some places. And Legolas and Gimli are becoming friends. And Strider is talking to Sam and Frodo. And there's some really good character building going on here. There's some good world building going on here. And they're moving down the stream. All right, so that's where we're gonna, or what we're gonna say about it. We ended at the end of this.
Don't forget they spotted Gollum too.
Oh yeah, they did. They spotted Gollum.
Or was
Okay,
it Gollum?
so
Boromir's acting weird.
and Boromir's starting to act a little weird. But he's getting closer to his home, so there's that. Rebecca, are you still there? Yes. Okay. So, yay! We're so glad. We're just going to finish the chapter because I know it's a little bit late. But we're just going to finish this chapter tonight. And then we're going to hopefully finish Fellowship of the Ring tomorrow. So that's the plan. All right. So here we are at the top of page 391. All right. So it's in the middle of chapter 9, the Great River. Sam sat tapping the hilt of his sword as if he were counting on his fingers and looking up at the sky. "It's very strange," he murmured. "The moon's the same in the Shire and in the Wilderland, or it ought to be, but either it's out of its running or I'm all wrong in my reckoning. You'll remember, Mr. Frodo, the moon was waning as we lay on the flet up in that tree, a week from the full, I reckon, and we'd been a week on the way last night when it pops a new moon as thin as a nail paring, and if we had never stayed no time in the Elvish country. Well, I can't remember 3 nights there for certain, and I seem to remember several more, but I would take my oath it was never a whole month. Anyone would think that time did not count in there. "And perhaps that is the way of it," said Frodo. "In that land maybe we were in a time that has elsewhere long gone by. It was not, I think, until Silverlode bore us back to Anduin that we returned to the time that flows through mortal lands to the great sea. And I don't remember any moon, either new or old, in and places alike. For the elves, the world moved." Are we still there?
I see you.
What's the last thing you remember, Rebecca? It's also not bright. I need to... There you go. I'll just start here. "Perhaps that is the way of it," said Frodo. "In that land, maybe, we were in a time that has elsewhere long gone by. It was not, I think, until Silverlode bore us back to Anduin that we returned to the time that flows through mortal lands to the great sea. And I don't remember any moon, either old or new, in Carasgaladhon, only stars by night and sun by day." Legolas stirred in his boat. "Nay, time does not tarry ever," he said, "but change and growth is not in all things and places alike. For the elves the world moves, and it moves both very swift and very slow. Swift because they themselves change little, and all else fleets by. It is grief to them. Slow because they do not count the running years, not for themselves. The passing seasons are but ripples ever repeated in the long, long stream. Yet beneath the sun all things must wear to an end at last." "But the wearing is slow in Lorien," said Frodo. "The power of the lady is on it. Rich are the hours, though short they seem, in Carasgaladhon, where Galadriel wields the elven ring." "That should not have been said aloud, or said outside Lorien, not even by me," said Aragorn. "Speak no more of it, but so it is, Sam. In that land you lost your count. There time flowed swiftly by us, as for the elves. The old moon passed and a new moon waxed and waned in the world outside while we tarried there, and yester eve a new moon came again. Winter is nearly gone. Time flows on to a spring of little hope." The night passed silently. No voice or call was heard again across the water. The travelers, huddled in their boats, felt the changing of the weather. The air grew warm and very still under the great moist clouds that had floated up from the south and the distant seas. The rushing of the river over the rocks of the rapids seemed to grow louder and closer. The twigs of the trees above them began to drip. When the day came, the mood of the world about them had become soft and sad. Slowly the dawn drew to a pale light, diffused and shadowless. There was mist on the river, and white fog swathed the shore. The far bank could not be seen. "I can't abide fog," said Sam, "but this seems to be a lucky one. Now perhaps we can get away without those cursed goblins seeing us." "Perhaps so," said Aragorn, "but it will be hard to find the path unless the fog lifts a little later on. And we must find the path if we are to pass Sarn Gabir and come to the Emyn Muil. I do not see why we should pass the rapids or follow the river any further," said Boromir. "If the Emyn Muil lie before us, then we can abandon these cockle-boats and strike westward and southward until we come to the Entwash and cross into my own land." "We can, if we are making for Minas Tirith," said Aragorn, "but that is not yet agreed, and such a course may be more perilous than it sounds. The vale of Entwash is flat and fenny, and fog is deadly peril there for those on foot and laden. I would not abandon our boats until we must. The river is at least a path that cannot be missed." "But the enemy holds the eastern bank," objected Boromir, "and even if you pass the gates of Argonath and come unmolested to the Tindrock, what will you do then? Leap down the falls and land in the marshes?" "No," answered Aragorn. "Say rather that we will bear our boats by the ancient way to Rhora's foot, and there take the water again. Do you not know, Boromir, or do you choose to forget the North Stair and the high seat upon Amon Hen that were made in the days of the great kings? I, at least, have a mind to stand in that high place again before I decide my further course. There, maybe, we shall see some sign that will guide us. Boromir held out long against this choice, but when it became plain that Frodo would follow Aragorn wherever he went, he gave in. It is not the way of the men of Minas Tirith to desert their friends at need, he said, and you will need my strength if ever you are to reach the Tendrock. To the tall isle I will go, but no further. There I will turn to my home alone if my help has not earned the reward of any companionship. The day was now growing, and the fog had lifted a little. It was decided that Aragorn and Legolas should at once go forward along the shore, while the others remained by the boats. Aragorn hoped to find some way by which they could carry both their boats and their baggage to the smoother water beyond the rapids. Boats to the elves would not sink, maybe, he said, but that does not say that we should come through Sarn Gabir alive. None have ever done so yet. No road was made by the men of Gondor in this region, for even in their great days their realm did not reach the Anduin beyond the Emyn Muil. But there is a portage way somewhere on the western shore, if I can find it. It cannot yet have perished, for light boats used to journey out of Wilderland down to Osgiliath, and still did so until a few years ago, when the orcs of Mordor began to multiply. Seldom in my life has any boat come out of the north, and the orcs prowl on the east shore, said Boromir. If you go forward, peril will grow with every mile, even if you find a path. Peril lies ahead on every southward road, answered Aragorn. Wait for us one day. If we do not return in that time, you will know that evil has indeed befallen us. Then you must take a new leader and follow him as best you can. It was with a heavy heart that Frodo saw Aragorn and Legolas climb the steep bank and vanish into the mists. But his fears proved groundless. Only 2 or 3 hours had passed, and it was barely midday when the shadowy shapes of the explorers appeared again. All is well, said Aragorn as he clambered down the bank. There is a track, and it leads to a good landing that is still serviceable. The distance is not great. The head of the rapids is but half a mile below us, and they are little more than a mile long. Not far beyond them, the stream becomes clear and smooth again, though it runs swiftly. Our hardest task will be to get our boats and baggage to the old portageway. We have found it, but it lies well back from the water side here, and runs under the lee of a rock wall, a furlong or more from the shore. We did not find where the northward landing lies. If it still remains, we must have passed it yesterday night. We might labor far upstream and yet miss it in the fog. I fear we must leave the river now and make for the portageway as best we can from here. That would not be easy, even if we were all men, said Boromir. Yet such as we are, we will try it, said Aragorn. Aye, we will, said Gimli, if the legs of men will lag on a rough road while a dwarf goes on. Be the burden twice his own weight, Master Boromir. The task proved hard indeed, yet in the end it was done. The goods were taken out of the boats and brought to the top of the bank, where there was a level space. Then the boats were drawn out of the water and carried up. They were far less heavy than any had expected. Of what tree growing in the elvish country they were made, not even Legolas knew, but the wood was tough and yet strangely light. Merry and Pippin alone could carry the boat with ease along the flat. None the less, it needed the strength of 2 men to lift and haul them over the ground that the company now had to cross. It sloped up away from the river, a tumbled waste of gray limestone boulders with many hidden holes shrouded with weeds and bushes. There were thickets of brambles and sheer dells, and here we're having connection issues again. I usually and it wants me to do this again. Okay. I usually what was I going to say? I usually make sure not to use the Wi-Fi. For some reason, this doesn't hold the signal on the Wi-Fi very well. But I forgot to do that tonight. One by one, Boromir and Aragorn carried the boats while the others toiled and scrambled after them with the baggage. At last all was removed and laid on the portage way. Then, with little further hindrance, save from sprawling briars and many fallen stones, they moved forward all together. Fog still hung in veils upon the crumbling rock wall, and to their left, mist shrouded the river. They could hear it rushing and foaming over the sharp shelves and stony teeth of Sarn Gabir, but they could not see it. Twice they made the journey before all was brought safe to the southern landing. There the portage way, turning back to the waterside, ran gently down to the shallow edge of a little pool. It seemed to have been scooped in by the riverside, not by hand, but by the water swirling down from Sarn Gabir against the low pier of rock that jutted out some way into the stream. Beyond it the shore rose sheer into grey cliff, and there was no further passage for those on foot. Already the short afternoon was past, and a dim, cloudy dusk was closing in. They sat beside the water, listening to the confused rush and roar of the rapids hidden in the mist. They were tired and sleepy, and their hearts were as gloomy as the dying day. "Well, here we are, and here we must pass another night," said Boromir. "We need sleep, and even if Aragorn had a mind to pass the gates of Argonath by night, we are all too tired, except, no doubt, our sturdy dwarf." Gimli made no reply. He was nodding as he sat. "Let us rest as much as we can now," said Aragorn. "Tomorrow we must journey by day again. Unless the weather changes once more and cheats us, we shall have a good chance of slipping through, unseen by any eyes on the eastern shore. But tonight two must watch together in turns, 3 hours off and 1 on guard." Nothing happened that night worse than a brief drizzle of rain an hour before dawn. As soon as it was fully light, they started. Already the fog was thinning. They kept as close as they could to the western side, and they could see the dim shapes of the low cliffs rising ever higher, shadowy walls with their feet in the hurrying river. In the mid-morning the clouds drew down lower, and it began to rain heavily. They drew the skin covers over the boats to prevent them from being flooded, and drifted on. Little cold could be seen before them or about them through the grey falling curtains. The rain, however, did not last long. Slowly the sky above grew lighter, and then suddenly the clouds broke, and their draggled fringes trailed away northward up the river. The fogs and mists were gone. Before the travelers lay a wide ravine with great rocky sides to which clung upon shelves and in narrow crevices a few thorn trees. The channel grew narrower and the river swifter. Now they were speeding along with little hope of stopping or turning, whatever they might meet ahead. Over them was a lane of pale blue sky, around them the dark overshadowed river, and before them black, shutting out the sun, the hills of Emin Muil, in which no opening could be seen. Frodo, peering forward, saw in the distance 2 great rocks approaching. Like great pinnacles or pillars of stone they seemed. Tall and sheer and ominous they stood upon either side of the stream. A narrow gap appeared between them, and the river swept the boats towards it. "Behold the Argonath, the pillars of the kings!" cried Aragorn. "We shall pass them soon. Keep the boats in line, and as far apart as you can. Hold the middle of the stream." As Frodo was borne toward them, the great pillars rose like towers to meet him. Giants they seemed to him, vast grey figures, silent but threatening. Then he saw that they were indeed shaped and fashioned. The craft and power of old had wrought upon them, and still they persevered, through the suns and rains of forgotten years, the mighty likenesses in which they had been hewn. Upon great pedestals founded in the deep waters stood 2 great kings of stone, still with blurred eyes and crannied brows, they frowned upon the north. The left hand of each was raised palm outward in gesture of warning. In each right hand there was an axe. Upon each head there was a crumbling helm and crown. Great power and majesty they still wore, the silent wardens of a long-vanished kingdom. Awe and fear fell upon Frodo, and he cowered down, shutting his eyes and not daring to look up at the boat as the boat drew near. Even Boromir bowed his head as the boats whirled by, frail and fleeting as little leaves under the enduring shadow of the sentinels of Numenor. So they passed into the dark chasm of the gates. Sheer rose the dreadful cliffs to unguessed heights on either side. Far off was the dim sky. The black waters roared and echoed, and a wind screamed over them. Frodo, crouching over his knees, heard Sam in front muttering and groaning. What a place! What a horrible place! Just let me get out of this boat, and I'll never wet my toes in a puddle again, let alone a river. Fear not, said a strange voice behind him. Frodo turned and saw Strider, and yet not Strider, for the weather-worn ranger was no longer there. In the stern sat Aragorn, son of Arathorn, proud and erect, guiding the boat with skillful strokes. His hood was cast back, and his dark hair was blowing in the wind. A light was in his eyes, a king returning from exile to his own land. Fear not, he said. Long have I desired to look upon the likeness of Isildur and Anarion, my sires of old. Under their shadow, Elisar, the Elfstone, son of Arathorn, the house of of the house of Valandil, Isildur's son, heir of Elendil, has naught to dread. Then the light of his eyes faded, and he spoke to himself. Would that Gandalf were here. How my heart yearns for Minas Arnor and the walls of my own city, but whither now shall I go? The chasm was long and dark, and filled with the noise of wind and rushing water and echoing stone. It bent somewhere toward the west, so that at first all was dark ahead, but soon Frodo saw a tall gap of light before him, ever growing. Swiftly it drew near, and suddenly the boat shot through, out into a wide, clear light. The sun, already long fallen from the noon, was shining in a windy sky. The pent waters spread out into a long oval lake, pale Nen Hithoel, fenced by steep gray hills, whose sides were clad with trees, but their heads were bare, cold gleaming in the sunlight. At the far southern end rose 3 peaks. The midmost stood somewhat forward from the others, and sundered from them an island in the waters, about which the flowing river flung pale shimmering arms. Distant but deep, there came up on the wind a roaring sound, like the roll of thunder heard far away. Behold, Tol Brandir, said Aragorn, pointing south to the tall peak. Upon the left stands Amon Lahal, and upon the right is Amon Hen, the hills of hearing and of sight. In the days of the great kings there were high seats upon them, and watch was kept there. But it is said that no foot of man or beast has ever been set upon Tol Brandir. Ere the shade of night falls, we shall come to them. I hear the endless voice of Rorus calling. The company rested now for a while, drifting south on the current that flowed through the middle of the lake. They ate some food, and then they took to their paddles and hastened on their way. The sides of the westward hills fell into shadow, and the sun grew round and red. Here and there a misty star peered out. The 3 peaks loomed before them, darkling in the twilight. Rorus was roaring with a great voice. Already night was laid upon the flowing waters when the travelers came at last under the shadow of the hills. The 10th day of their journey was over. Wilderland was behind them. They could go no further without choice between the East Way and the West. The last stage of the quest was before them. And chapter 10 we will have to read tomorrow, in which we conclude the Fellowship of the Ring with the last chapter, the breaking of the fellowship. And the first word is Aragorn. So, I hope that you are enjoying the story. 10 days out of Lothlorien. They just got to the giant statues of Isildur and whatever the other king's name is. I know I read it, but I can't remember it. Like not much. I'm not sure what that means.
That was a while back.
Okay, so I hope that you're having a great night. I hope you're enjoying the story. We'll see you tomorrow when we get to finish the Fellowship of the Ring. God bless. Good night.